It was a Tuesday morning. Like so many other mornings, the sound of the alarm brought Carla back to reality. She stretched, trying to ignore the overwhelming tiredness that consumed her, but she couldn't. Her body felt heavy, as if each movement was a battle. The previous night had been long, a mix of working late, family worries, and the constant feeling that she was always behind, always running, never managing to catch up with what needed to be done. Breakfast, if you could even call it that, was rushed. A piece of bread, cold coffee, and eyes glued to the phone. The day already felt like a reflection of her routine. Rushed, with no time to pause, no space to breathe. She knew the supermarket was one of the tasks ahead. What seemed simple often became one of her greatest sources of frustration. The shopping list was in her mind, but her head was full of other concerns. The mounting work, the child who had a fever the night before, the husband asking for more attention, the feeling that hours were slipping by, and she just couldn't do enough. And there it was again, the pressure of time. I can't afford to waste time, Carla. Just go to the store and get it over with, she thought, trying to convince herself it would be quick. The supermarket was relatively quiet when she arrived, but as she approached the checkout line, the feeling of urgency intensified. The elderly woman ahead of her seemed immune to any sense of urgency. She was calmly chatting with the cashier, discussing something, rummaging through her bag, seemingly in no hurry. Carla looked around. There were only a few people, but everyone's pace seemed out of sync with hers. Everything felt so slow, every second a burden. The line is taking forever, this is making me even later, she thought, feeling her anxiety start to rise. The cashier was taking forever. Carla felt her eyes fixate on the imaginary clock in her head, as though time were something tangible she could control, but she couldn't. The pressure in her chest built, her hands began to sweat, and she could no longer hide her growing irritation. The minor delay at the supermarket was becoming a reflection of all the other delays in her life. The work that wasn't moving forward, the responsibilities piling up, the weight of life feeling irreparably out of control. She glanced around, trying to distract herself for a moment. To her right, the cashier was distracted, fiddling with the terminal, typing something, and that's when she saw the opportunity. The worker was distracted, and the elderly woman ahead of her, still paying slowly, seemed not to notice anything. The space ahead was clear. Take the opportunity, Carla. Don't let this time slip away, she thought, not realizing that her decision was driven by desperation, not rational thought. The impulse was almost immediate. She stepped forward, positioning herself strategically between the cashier and the woman, leaving no time for any reaction. I just need this. One more minute, and I can leave here, she justified mentally. She didn't realize the impact of her actions at first. The elderly woman, noticing what Carla had done, was stunned. You're cutting the line, she said in a sharp voice, her indignation clear. Carla's blood boiled, and anger took over her like a tidal wave. I'm in a hurry, what don't you understand? She thought, trying to convince herself she was doing what needed to be done. But at the same time, a flicker of doubt started to form in her mind. This isn't right, but I have no other choice. The elderly woman kept complaining. Her voice grew louder, attracting the attention of other customers. Carla felt the pressure building. The tension in the air now felt like an extension of her own anxiety. She tried to avert her gaze, but soon everyone was staring at her. Every sigh seemed to echo in her mind. I'm doing something wrong, but I can't go back now, she thought as her breathing became more rapid. The weight of the situation seemed to grow with each passing second. The manager appeared, his expression neutral but his gaze sharp. He politely asked Carla to return to her place in line, explaining that her actions were causing discomfort. Carla tried to argue, her voice rising involuntarily. I don't have time for this. I'm just trying to get things done faster. The manager, patient, repeated his request. She felt a knot form in her throat, her pride pushing her to resist, but at the same time, a sense of shame began to creep over her body. The feeling of losing control of the situation, of being observed by everyone, made her want to disappear. Why am I doing this? What's wrong with me? The inner questioning was swift, but it couldn't be ignored. The tension stretched on for a few more minutes until the manager, probably tired of the back and forth, offered Carla a solution. She could go ahead, but the gaze of everyone seemed heavier than any convenience. She grabbed her groceries quickly, silently, and passed by as fast as she could, feeling the shame dragging behind her. The rest of the line watched her in silence, and Carla realized that she was no longer just dealing with a delay at the supermarket, but with something much bigger. The feeling of failure was everywhere. At home, Carla unloaded the groceries in silence, trying not to think about what had just happened. She didn't know how to deal with the pressure she was feeling. It was just a line. Why does this bother me so much? But she knew it wasn't just about the line. It was about control. Control over her life, her time, her emotions. That small incident at the supermarket was just a reflection of what she had been facing every day, the constant struggle against the chaos of her life. Angst started rising in her chest, like a deep emptiness. She knew something needed to change, and for the first time, she began to look at herself more closely. I need to learn how to deal with this. I can't keep going like this, she thought, as tears began to form in her eyes. She wasn't just asking about the situation. She was asking about all the times she had felt lost, pressured, and didn't know how to get out of the vicious cycle. That night was long. Carla couldn't sleep properly. She spent the night thinking about how she was feeling. What had seemed like a simple conflict at the supermarket had turned into a warning. She was sinking, not just in the pile of responsibilities, but in her own unrealistic expectations. That scene at the supermarket, so small, became the trigger for a great transformation. She began to realize where all the anger, all the exhaustion, was coming from. The pressure to be perfect, the fear of failure. That moment at the supermarket was a sign. She needed to understand where these feelings came from and how to handle them without losing herself even more. The following day, Carla did something she had never done before. She sought help. She made an appointment with a therapist. The process wasn't easy. The sessions were challenging, as Carla had to face the reality of her own emotions. She realized she had spent years pushing down accumulated frustrations, the pressure to be perfect, the fear of failing. That small scene at the supermarket was just the spark for a massive shift. She began to understand that the control she was so desperately seeking wasn't in external things, but in how she related to herself. The following months were a process of learning and self-discovery. Carla didn't learn to magically control life, but she learned to be kinder to herself. She began to set healthier boundaries, to be more honest about her needs, and to respect her own feelings. She learned to take deep breaths when she felt stress creeping in, to allow herself time to relax, and to ask for help when necessary. And on a spring afternoon, Carla went to the supermarket again. This time, the scene was familiar, but different. The line was longer, the cashier was slow, and the elderly woman ahead of her had an impatient look on her face. Carla didn't feel angry. She didn't feel rushed. She looked at the cashier and took a deep breath. I can handle this, she thought, with a gentle smile on her lips. She wasn't at the mercy of time anymore. She was at peace with her own pace, with her own limits. The incident at the supermarket became a distant memory, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder of her capacity to change, to grow, and to forgive herself. Carla was no longer a slave to her fear of failing. She was learning to live with more calm, more balance, and finally, more control over herself.